In 1970, Ford introduced a small car that cost $2,000 and weighed 2,000 pounds. They marketed it as the little carefree car. They sold 3 million of them over the next decade, and it nearly destroyed the company. The Ford Pinto became the most infamous car in American history, not because it was ugly, not because it was slow, because it had a tendency to explode into a fireball when hit from behind. The man who wanted this car built was Lee Iacocca. He was president of Ford Motor Company, and he saw Japanese imports eating into American sales. Toyota, Datsun, small, cheap, fuel-efficient cars that American manufacturers had ignored. Iacocca demanded Ford build a competitor. He set strict limits. The car would weigh no more than 2,000 pounds. It would cost no more than $2,000. And it would be ready for the 1971 model year. The normal development time for a new car was about 43 months. Iacocca gave his engineers 25 months. They had to cut corners somewhere. The fuel tank became one of those corners. Engineers placed the gas tank behind the rear axle, only a few inches from the rear bumper. This was common practice in American cars at the time, but the Pinto had almost no crush space in the rear. No structural reinforcement. The bumper was what one engineer called essentially ornamental. In crash tests, Ford discovered exactly what would happen when another car hit a Pinto from behind at moderate speed. The rear would crumple. The fuel tank would be driven into the differential housing, a heavy metal component covered in bolts and sharp edges. The tank would rupture. Fuel would spray into the passenger compartment. A spark would ignite the vapors, and the car would become a fireball. Ford engineers found several cheap fixes. A rubber bladder to line the fuel tank cost between $5 and $8 per car. A plastic shield between the tank and the differential cost about $2. Structural reinforcement in the rear cost around $4. None of these fixes were implemented. Ford conducted what became known as a cost-benefit analysis. The document calculated that it would cost $137 million to fix all Pintos and similar vehicles. Against this, Ford estimated the cost of lawsuits from burn deaths and injuries at around $49 million. The math was simple. It was cheaper to let people burn. Ford also owned a patent on a safer fuel tank design. They chose not to use it. When asked later whether anyone brought safety concerns to Iacocca, one engineer answered directly, "Hell no, that person would have been fired." Safety was not a popular subject around Ford in those days. With Lee, it was taboo. Iacocca used to say, "Safety does not sell." The deaths began almost immediately. A woman named Lily Gray was driving her Pinto on a California freeway in 1972 when the car stalled. Another vehicle hit her from behind at about 30 miles per hour. The gas tank ruptured. The car exploded. Gray died hours later. Her passenger, a 13-year-old boy named Richard Grimshaw, survived, with burns over most of his body. He required dozens of surgeries. Doctors had to graft him a new ear and nose from the few patches of unburned skin they could find. Grimshaw sued Ford. The jury awarded $125 million in punitive damages. They chose that number deliberately. Ford had made $124 million in profit from the Pinto. The jury wanted Ford to pay back every penny and then some. The judge later reduced the award to $3.5 million. In 1977, Mother Jones magazine published an investigation called Pinto Madness. The article called the car a fire trap and a death trap. It revealed the cost-benefit analysis. It showed that Ford knew exactly what was happening and chose to do nothing. The publicity forced a federal investigation. On June 9, 1978, Ford recalled 1.5 million Pintos and 30,000 Mercury Bobcats for fuel system modifications. It was the largest recall in automotive history at the time. But the worst was yet to come. On August 10, 1978, in Elkhart County, Indiana, 18-year-old Judy Ulrich was driving a 1973 Pinto with her 16-year-old sister Lynn and their 18-year-old cousin Donna. They had just filled up with gas. Judy slowed to check that the gas cap was secure. A Chevrolet van driven by a 21-year-old man rear-ended them. The Pinto exploded. Lynn and Donna burned to death inside the car. Judy died later from her injuries. 1 month later, an Indiana grand jury did something that had never been done before in American history. They indicted a corporation for homicide. Ford Motor Company faced 3 counts of reckless homicide. The prosecutor was Michael Cosentino, working with a budget of about $20,000 and a staff of volunteer law professors and students. Ford hired James Neal, a famous Watergate prosecutor, with a staff of 80 lawyers and a budget of about $1 million. The trial lasted 10 weeks in the small town of Winamac, Indiana. Population 2,400. Ford won. The jury deliberated for 4 days before finding the company not guilty on all charges. Ford's lawyers convinced the jury that the Pinto was stopped when the van hit it, meaning the impact was high speed and would have caused similar damage to any small car. But the damage to Ford's reputation was permanent. Lee Iacocca later admitted what the scandal had cost the company. "The suits might have bankrupted us," he said. "We kept our mouths shut for fear of saying anything that just one jury might have construed as an admission of guilt. Winning in court was our top priority. Nothing else mattered." Ford stopped making the Pinto in 1980. Mother Jones estimated between 500 and 900 people died in Pinto fires. The official count was 27. The Pinto changed everything. It changed product liability law. It changed corporate accountability. It changed how Americans thought about the companies that built their cars. Ford survived. But for a few years in the late 1970s, that outcome was not guaranteed. A $2,000 car that was supposed to save the company from Japanese competition nearly ended Ford Motor Company instead.